The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 741 Timeline. For quite a while, Lex ate while he listened to Mary brief him on all that had happened during his slumber. The deteriorating situation in the Origin realm was obviously not a good thing. Moreover, the fact that the Fugen were becoming more active as a result of the terrorists' activities was not a good sign. He had been under the impression that the Henali were on the winning side of the war with the Fugen, but if these new terrorist acts were any indication, then the war was about to heat up considerably. That was bad news for his 1,000 employees participating in the war. Fortunately, so far, they had not suffered a single casualty. Once he was done eating, he organized a schedule to take care of his most immediate matters first. Ordinarily that would mean meeting with Charles, but Lex was looking forward to meeting the devil who wanted to host a 5 trillion MP event at his inn. The timing for such an event was not necessarily the best, considering the realm-wide situation. Moreover, in 6 months, or 5.5 months now, the inn would stop accepting new guests. If the event was going to take a long time, which he suspected it would have to be delayed a few years. Lex did not mind, as he had more than enough MP to meet his needs for the moment. He dressed up in his host attire and teleported over to his office, and had Mary invite Rocket Fellow in. The devil arrived quite quickly, as if he had been awaiting a summoning to meet the Innkeeper. "Innkeeper, it has been a while," the stylishly dressed devil said as he tipped his hat. "I hope your time passed pleasantly," the Innkeeper replied calmly, a warm gentle smile on his face. "Ah, I'm afraid not," the devil replied, a hint of regret in his voice. "Some of my most recent ventures have all ended in failure. But, those are all small projects, and don't compare for what we have in store ahead. You see, while other matters also occupied me, I have also spent this time preparing to make our own version of Lady Cosmos the best possible. I think you will be quite interested in some of my propositions." "I'm sure you have prepared an excellent plan," the Innkeeper said, "but before we delve too deeply into these matters, I have to inform you of something, in case it might interfere with your timeline. The Midnight Inn is getting ready to undergo some renovations, so to speak. As a result, in a little over 5 months, the inn will stop accepting new guests for the foreseeable future. So, if the event is to occur over a long period of time, you may want to wait till afterwards." The devil was surprised, and that could clearly be seen as he paused for a moment to re-evaluate his thoughts. His excitement tempered just a bit and he leaned back into his chair as he went through some considerations. "Actually, you know what? This is probably a good thing. This will allow us more time to refine the idea before we make our investment. Let's go over some of my plans, and you can tell me what's appropriate." The meeting went on a lot longer than Lex anticipated, even though Lex's refusal to have contestants capture slaves and have them fight to the death put a real wrench in the devil's plans. Still, other than his casual cruelty, the devil had many good ideas, and Lex strongly believed that the event would be very successful. The target audience for the event was nascent-level cultivators, and maybe even some Earth immortals, both of whom had very long lives. As such, the event itself would also go on for 10 years, at the very least, which would also justify the absurd amount of MP being invested in it. The timeline for the event was pushed forward, which apparently suited the devil perfectly. He left the meeting with a smile, though the moment he teleported out of the inn, his smile vanished. "Karen, tell the others. The timeline has been pushed forward. We need to take action within 2 years. Prepare everything. Not an issue. The targets have already been found in the Swirling galaxy, and we are in close contact with the Fugen, trying to work out a deal." Back at the inn, Lex could not help but groan. Although he was looking forward to the MP, he was not a fan of extremely long business meetings. He didn't know how businessmen back on Earth did it. "Mary, send in Charles," Lex said after a few moments of allowing himself to be lazy. He had too much to catch up on. Soon, a young, skinny man dressed in a doctor's coat stepped in. Although Lex did not show it on his face, he was impressed by the doctor's demeanor as he exhibited a calm and collected appearance, even in front of the Innkeeper. It had to be known that for anyone to meet him, they would have to cross his lobby, which was filled with an extremely strong pressure. Since the pressure would automatically adjust to whoever was crossing, no one could ever have an easy time coming in. Yet this new doctor seemed perfectly fine coming into his office. In fact, it almost seemed like the doctor had already expected such an obstacle in his path. Not to mention how difficult it was for one to remain calm in the presence of the innkeeper, with no cultivation at all. Now that he was inside the inn, Lex naturally scanned Charles, but still did not discover anything suspicious. His age was 17 years old, and he had no cultivation at all. His demeanor and knowledge did not match his credentials, but Lex was not on to judge. "Doctor, I've heard you're quite dissatisfied with how we run things here," said Lex, maintaining the calm and warm vibe of the innkeeper. "I would not say dissatisfied, sir. But I have many ideas I think you will like. Why don't you hear me out?" Chapter 742 Talking. "Have a seat," the innkeeper said calmly, pointing at the chair in front of him. This Charles definitely had many secrets, and he was now in a much better position to get those secrets out from him. Previously he himself was in too much of a hurry to exit that planet. Now, though, he had plenty of time as well as a superior identity as compared to last time. "I must say, Charles, you're quite talented. It is not often that I see someone as young as you with such detailed knowledge about medicine, and such a mature bearing to go along with it." Although Lex was paying a compliment, he was also stating his suspicions. It was unnatural to gain such a thorough understanding in any field without years of study and practice, and Charles was much too young for that. Of course there was always the possibility that he had information transferred to his mind, the way those in the crystal race transmit information from one generation to another. But even so, comprehending and mastering that knowledge was vastly different from simply attaining it. Charles gave an oddly endearing smile, as if a child was looking up at his elder. He could not really be blamed. Unlike others, who were greatly intimidated by beings more powerful, Charles felt safe. After all, he grew up in the presence of nearly all the mythical beings of the origin realm. Azel and Firen, for example, were two of the mythical beings of the crystal realm. That meant that those mythical beings were always at the peak most leveled at the realm they were in allowed. Of course, they could also choose to unleash their full strength, which would then have them transcend their realm, a path that most of them eventually took. After hearing about the innkeeper's great reputation, and finally meeting him and feeling his warm and comforting aura, Charles felt as if he had returned to his childhood. "Forgive me for being unable to say much, Senior. My history is closely tied to the fate of my ancestor, I cannot risk it. But I can swear that I bear thee in no ill will, and all that I do is only to benefit it as much as possible. The Midnight Inn does not discriminate against others, as long as they follow the rules of the inn. So long as you do not harm your peers or the guests out of maliciousness, you can call the inn your new home." Although Lex said as much, he was a little peeved at Charles's forthcoming behavior. With him being so open about having secrets, it was nigh impossible to pressure him into revealing things. All he could do now was to have him slowly reveal his secrets of his own volition. "But, because of that innkeeper, I can also guarantee that my knowledge is not false. Although what I know might be slightly outdated, some of the things I know are still relevant now. For example, I've taken a look at the recovery room and recovery pods. In theory they're excellent, but in actuality they're far from efficient, and are not necessarily the best tool for the job. In simple words, it's like using brute force to heal the body by throwing endless energy at it. If, instead, we take a more nature-oriented approach, then there are many better ways to heal. Besides, those rooms and pods are not suitable for all races either. I've also studied some of the workers at the inn. Most of them are suffering from odd forms of malnutrition. At first, I was confused, but upon further analysis I discovered that it seemed like many of them had latent skills and talents awaiting to be woken as soon as the right conditions were met. Such a widespread phenomenon among so many different people was strange at first for me, until I realized that they also all bore the signs of cloning and artificial genetic engineering. I must say, I have never seen such high-quality clones, with perfectly functional organic bodies and independent and complete souls. Not only is the technique used in their manufacture beyond excellent, but the original samples must be from the absolute best of the best. However, pre-existing physical dispositions are causing a conflict with their new, emerging personalities, which is resulting in their malnutrition. Many of them need a lifestyle adjustment to properly awaken their talents. If they are left ignored until they are eventually crippled, then their own individual cultivation will suffer as well. I've also noticed that the inn seems to have adopted many younglings such as the sovereign turtle, who is still not but a babe, the Cthulhu, the Fenrir, and many others. It's miraculous how so many varying races are getting together without any issues, but they all also need different environmental factors to ensure they maintain healthy growth in the future. For now, the inn seems to lack it. Also, I've noticed a few sentient plants have been born at the inn. If you can have the galactic turtle nurture a world tree at the inn, even in its early stages, it will be extremely beneficial to the growth of the plant life here. Also, Innkeeper, one of your guests, the mountain man, is suffering from severe soul exhaustion. It's almost as if its soul is not strong enough for its body. Whatever the case, he needs to undergo treatment immediately, lest his soul becomes crippled. Oh yes, you also have a drake. Interesting species, I have seen it before. They usually have the potential to undergo evolution into a weak dragon under the right circumstances, so I was. Once Charles started to talk, he just kept on going. Most of what he said even made sense, so Lex had no option but to listen to him and wonder if he really was more suited as a doctor rather than as a senior member in the planning division. 3 hours later, Lex had to eventually stop him. Let's take a break here for today, the innkeeper said, standing up. Since you're a doctor, I want you to follow me as I visit one of our old employees. He's recently been seriously wounded, and lost all his cultivation as a result. Chapter 743 Unusual Damage. Many of Charles's ideas were not bad, but they weren't practical either. He could propose stuff like treatment through natural means because he had the knowledge, but with hundreds of thousands of guests visiting the recovery room every day, it was impossible for him to take care of all the guests. He could begin teaching others his own knowledge, but that too would take years before it yielded any real results. As such, there was no real way to implement all his changes right now. Some of them, however, were not so bad and could be implemented immediately. For example, the lifestyle adjustment for the inn workers. He always knew that they weren't born naturally since the inn created them as and when he wanted, and he could even pick stuff like their bloodlines. Such topics demanded some philosophical questions such as the ethics of cloning, and if what Lex was doing was right or wrong. The way he saw it, he was doing his best to give them full and extensive lives and treating them as best as he could. He also created a healthy and nurturing environment for them to grow in. For example, while originally all his workers had their own individual rooms they could teleport to, and still do, most of them preferred to go to the minor realm dedicated only for inn workers and live in their homes there. They were building their own community, as well as culture and traditions. Given all of that, it was really hard for Lex to see what he was doing as immoral. But if they were suffering due to improper care as a result of their cloning, then that was something he would take care of immediately. It made sense, kind of, that many of them had a predisposition to awaken certain talents and skills. After all, some of his most powerful workers had awoken skills completely unrelated to their cultivation techniques. If, by designing a better environment suited to nurture their skills, he could help them, then he would definitely do it. How would you treat the mountain man? Lex asked once he teleported himself and Charles over to the recovery room. The problem is the strength of his soul, so that is what I would treat. It would be best if I could get my hands on various soul-nurturing herbs, or anything which could influence souls really. Designing a treatment plan for him is not so simple, so I'll need some time to see what resources are available and what I can do. Go find Harry, the local barber. He specializes in souls. He may be able to help you with that, the innkeeper said, before entering John's private room. The man lay in his recovery pod, looking pale and extremely weak. Instead of getting better, his situation had deteriorated a lot, though he was finally stable now. Weakly, he opened his eyes and looked up at the innkeeper and the stranger, and a light of hope flashed through his eyes. If anyone could help him, it was the innkeeper. But he didn't say anything yet, as he was unfamiliar with the second man. "Observe him and see if you can work out a treatment plan for him," Lex said casually, while he used his own spirit sense to scan him. Using the system to get a reading on him revealed errors, as always, so he could only rely on himself to figure out the situation. Physically speaking, John was fine. Even his core, or what used to be his core, was technically fine. It had now only become empty, as if it could not store any energy inside it at all. The situation was unusual. Next, Lex used his soul sense to check up on him, and that is when the issue was revealed. John's soul was damaged in a very strange and somehow precise way. His otherwise healthy soul had thin yet jagged cracks spread all across it, as if it was on the verge of breaking. Yet the strange thing was, besides the areas that actually had the cracks on them, the rest of his soul looked extremely healthy, as if nothing was wrong. "I've seen something like this before," Charles said, as he studied John's body by touching and tapping it in various places. Lex found it really interesting how, despite having no cultivation himself, Charles could harness spiritual energy and use it for his various purposes. This type of control went against conventional cultivation rules. This is a result of a fracture of a soul treasure. Normally, even the destruction of such a treasure would not affect the cultivator. But in this case, rather than just storing the treasure in your soul, you must have completely absorbed and merged it with your soul, am I right? Although Charles asked the question, he did not pause to hear the answer. "I'm not sure how something like this happened, but someone has targeted your soul treasure very specifically. They have severely damaged the treasure without affecting your actual soul at all. That is the only reason you are still alive, for your soul is keeping the treasure together from crumbling entirely. But such a state cannot last long. Either a way to remove the treasure needs to be figured out, or the treasure needs to be healed. The only thing that I cannot figure out is why something like this has caused your cultivation to disappear. Especially since you are in the immortal realm, and have established your tenets. It somehow seems like your connection to your own tenets has been severed somehow. Thank you, Charles, I'll take it from here. You can go meet Harry and figure out a treatment for the mountain man. Only when you have a complete treatment will we approach the guest, for it is rude to interrupt guests unnecessarily." Charles nodded and left, taking one last look at John. He was really confused about his situation and really wanted to ask what the treasure fused with his soul was, but knew better than to do so. Soon, only the innkeeper and John were left in the room. Chapter 744 Virus. "Congratulations on emerging from the murder grounds," said the innkeeper as he looked down at John, though his warm voice had a hint of admonishment in it. John smiled weakly, despite his dire situation. "I know I should not have accepted the challenge. If I had let the inn handle it, things would have turned out much better. But, at that time I just didn't like the fact that any random creature off the streets could just challenge me. I guess it's also because I'd spent too much time in such a peaceful environment, and I was itching to let loose." "And how is that itch now?" he asked, the warmth of his voice sounding ironically quite biting at that moment. "Quite sore," John admitted. Lex shook his head and opened the recovery pod. He used impervious hands and channeled his soul sense into it, allowing his hands to gain the ability to touch souls. Gently, and ever so slowly, Lex touched John's soul to get a sense of the situation himself. As Charles had said, the soul treasure had been attacked, but his understanding of the situation was limited. Systems were far from simple, and Lex found it hard to believe that someone could target a system so directly. Although if anyone were to do it, it made sense that this group who was specifically targeting systems would be able to. He still did not know as much about them as he would like. As Lex traced his hands over the cracks, and could sense a very familiar aura from within. The system truly seemed broken, but as far as he knew, systems were capable of healing themselves. Absorbing other systems would speed up the process for sure, but they could rely on just spiritual energy to do the same. "He targeted your system," the innkeeper said plainly, though somehow the news did not cause any waves in John's heart. He had already guessed as much by now. Moreover, the innkeeper was the strongest being he had ever met, so he long stopped trying to keep secrets from him. Has your interface completely vanished, or is it still there at least? It gave me a quest before completely disappearing, and draining my cultivation along with it. How am I supposed to complete a quest like this? What was the quest? To heal the system, John said, though he found the quest to be redundant. He would have done it anyway, or at least tried, had his cultivation not completely disappeared. I have said this many times, but one should not put too much trust in a system. There is too much about them that is secret. Systems are able to heal themselves using spirit energy, or you can heal them by absorbing and merging other systems. You can even make your system stronger if you do so, but that may not necessarily be a good thing. After all, systems can completely control your entire life if you do not keep up your guard. For example, your system likely absorbed your cultivation to fuel its own repairing process. To it, it hardly matters whether you are its host or someone else. It just wants to regain its previous state as quickly as possible. My cultivation was given to me by the system to begin with. I cannot really complain now that it has taken it away, John replied, depression leaking into his voice. You can decide what you want to do on your own, the innkeeper said. If you wish to repair the system, you can see if you can figure out a way. However, if you wish to be free of it, I can remove it from your body. You will likely have to cultivate again from the beginning, but I don't think you should find that too challenging. John was silent for a time, before he weakly asked, Can I take my time with the decision? It's up to you. But based on your situation, I don't think you should wait too long. How did he hurt your system like this to begin with? He had many strange devices that seemed to target systems specifically. It kept interfering with all my system's functions. In the end, I eventually killed him, and until then I was fine. But as it turned out, he had hidden a device inside his body as well. When his heart stopped beating, his body self-destructed. But, the strange thing was, the explosion did not harm me at all, yet was extremely damaging to my system. But even then I was fine since I reacted fast enough. But something unusual happened. It was as if a virus had been introduced in my system, and it began acting really strange and somehow started to harm itself. In the end, the system managed to fix itself, but by then the damage the virus had done was too severe. It gave me the quest and shut down. Lex only nodded, and then left, giving John time to think about what he wanted to do. Lex, on the other hand, began considering precautions to take if any such people came after him. But, for some reason, he also had a feeling that dealing with his system was not nearly as easy as it was on the weaker systems he had encountered. As he pondered on this topic, he teleported back to his office and had Mary bring the things Alexander left for him. A letter was very strange, as Alexander could have simply left a video or voice message. But his suspicions seemed to bear no fruit, as he could not discover anything special about the letter. The only thing left to do was read it, and investigate the spatial ring he had left. After that, he would look into relocating the refugees from Abruptly, after which he would head out to do his own things. As for the many devils who wanted to meet him, Lex would just use his projection to meet with them. He did not have the time to spare to sit through so many endless meetings. Chapter 7:45 Letter. The envelope only read Lex and had a smooth texture to it. After concluding that there was nothing amiss with the letter, Lex tore open the pale white packaging and revealed within it an off-white textured paper filled with a very pleasant handwriting. Lex once again found it odd that it was handwritten when it could have easily been printed, but ultimately chalked it all up to a quirk of Alexander's noble upbringing. Nully, Lex. Nully, were it that I would be writing to you in better circumstances, I would have thanked you profusely for your help. You not only saved my life, surely, but that of countless others as well, and that deserves no shortage of gratitude, especially since it was not your duty to begin with. Nully, unfortunately, circumstances are not pleasant, so I must end the flattery here. I do not know if you were present during the final moments of Abruptly, but the situation went drastically out of hand. It quickly became clear to us that there was something amiss with the insects, for towards the end their blood directly started warping and tearing space. The more insects we killed, the more fragile space became. Nully, when the order to retreat came, it was already too late. Only those I had distributed the keys to managed to escape when the night sky itself was torn asunder. What I am about to reveal to you now is confidential, and I have been informed that I will soon have a soul lock placed on me so that if I ever try to reveal it, I will be killed. Fortunately, they have not placed the lock yet, and there is a convenient loophole for me to use. Nully the soul technique works on my memory, so I am writing this letter to you in the Chamber of Secrets, and once I finish, I will erase the memory of ever revealing it from my memory. That way, you will gain the relevant knowledge, and I will be safe from the consequences of the lock. Nully, the final tear that opened large enough to swallow Pulbitby did not open on its own, but a massive creature the likes of which I have never even imagined was on the other side of the rip, pulling space apart. Nully, it then pushed forth more arms from the tear, and seemed to grab the planet itself, before pulling it within. I, of course, did not stay long enough to see the event happen for myself, but one can imagine. Nully, I do not know what is actually happening, but I know enough to conclude that whatever is happening is far outside the capacity of even the Empire to handle. In this universe, one cannot rely on others for security, or at least not rely on others completely. That is the conclusion I have come to. Nully, my new goal will no longer be to hunt down the terrorists, especially since the Empire no longer seems interested, and they claim that others are on the hunt now. Instead, my new focus will be on growing my strength. Nully, I have a confession to make. My family is not originally from Earth, and instead we arrived there hundreds of years ago, escaping from an already long-forgotten conflict. We brought along various secret heritages, one of which I managed to awake at a very young age, which is the real reason my family so carefully nurtured my growth. That is also why I was able to control 6 flying swords even before I unlocked my spirit sense. Nully, I am revealing this to you to let you know that while I am pursuing my own path to strength, I have every confidence that you, too, will do the same. However, should you ever find your path blocked, and need a heritage or technique to guide you along higher cultivation realms, my family's library is always open to you. Nully, by the time you read this letter, I will already be inside the mysterious tower that the Empire is guarding. That tower has many secrets as well, and can serve as a shortcut for my growth. If you have time, you should try to practice there more as well. Who knows, we might just partner up again someday. Nully regards. Nully Alexander Morrison. Lex read the letter several times to ensure there was no secret message or code written within that he was missing, but there seemed to be none. Despite that, the information shared in the letter was very significant, and seen through a certain lens, Alexander even risked his life to share it with Lex. Although it did not directly influence Lex to know that there was a creepy space monster able to tear space and then pull planets and planets that it grabbed with its hands, it was still good to know. After all, what if one day he had such a guest? What if his guest ate planets for food? What was he supposed to do? Lex did not have any spare planets on hand to feed hungry guests. On a serious note though, it reinforced Lex's motivation to get the hell out of the origin realm and get far away from this ridiculous war. As for whether someone was able to find his new realm, and then start a war with him over it, were topics Lex was doing his best not to worry about. After all, there was little he could do in such a situation but fight back. Taking in a deep breath, Lex calmed himself down and then looked at the spatial ring. Alexander had not mentioned it at all. He channeled his spirit energy into the ring and discovered only a couple of things. One was a token that had a massive M on it, likely representing the Morrison family. The other was a commendation letter for ACA Lex for discovering the poison early, and warning the Empire about it. The letter stated that Lex had proven he had the ability to perform certain tasks where the Empire failed, and that his stellar performance would be marked and speak in his favor with the Empire in all his future endeavors. Chapter 7 46 Refugees. Lex observed the 2 items. The commendation letter and the approval of the Empire could possibly be useful in the future. After all, the Empire spanned many galaxies, so who knew when and where he might encounter their influence. But, at the moment, it served no real purpose. Similarly, the token served no purpose for him right now, but the gesture it represented was very valuable. Besides possibly giving him access to the Morrison family's library of spiritual techniques, it also served as a token of Alexander's gratitude. That, to him, was worth more than the actual techniques he would likely encounter. After all, his own technique was nothing short of the best in the entire universe. He smiled, and teleported them away to his study in his own apartment. If he ever needed to use either of the items he would have them, but otherwise they would enter his private collection. Now it was time to turn his attention to other matters, specifically, the refugees. A quick scan revealed that roughly 4,000 people who counted as such refugees could be found at the inn, including Giselle and two very familiar kids. There were supposed to be more, but they had already moved into the minor realm that the Empire was in charge of protecting. The ones who were still here were the ones still recovering from the effects of the poison that had infected their bodies. Charles had been very effective in treating the incredibly dangerous poison for some reason, and his treatment didn't even include chocolate this time or leeches. In his own words, while he was not too familiar with the human body, he was well versed in the habits and behavior shown by nature, plants, small animals, and insects. He could use just that understanding to manipulate nature in certain ways, and even the most toxic poison was still a part of nature. He sounded a lot like an elf or a druid to Lex, but as long as methods worked, who was he to question him? As much as Charles wanted to continue to enforce his methods on the remainder of their treatment, he couldn't manage that, alongside all the other numerous tasks he had to perform in the little time he had. Lex slightly suspected the man had ADHD, for he was delving into too many unrelated matters. Still, his incredibly high competence in each field made it so that Lex did not mind too much. Lex explored various options that the system gave him, and even consulted Mary on what he could do. He even considered the possibility of hosting a very specific event, but it was all for naught. The only way for the refugees to escape to another planet was if their prestige level rose, and then they chose to teleport to another planet linked to the inn. Speaking of which, it also needed to be mentioned that the connection to Polbitvi still existed. That meant that the planet had survived being ripped out of its star system, and whatever else it had been exposed to during its time in its first ever field trip. He sighed and scanned the inn to search for whichever Jotun officer was in charge of the refugees, and was surprised to find that it was the very senior Alexander had taken him to. The man seemed to have lost a lot of weight in the past 2 weeks, and looked pale and sick, yet he was still attending to some paperwork. Lex recalled that the man was called Radamai. Instead of summoning him, Lex teleported over himself, and knocked on the man's door. Come in," he said in a somewhat hoarse voice. It was clear that he had suffered some kind of injury to his throat since he last saw Lex, and his voice had been affected. "Excuse me for interrupting you, dear guest. I am the innkeeper, owner of this humble establishment," he introduced himself as he entered his room. There were piles of paper everywhere, and temporarily set up computer screens all over, making the small bedroom appear quite messy. Radamai was startled, and immediately stood up, revealing various bandages all over his body. "Innkeeper. It is an honor to meet you. Urine has saved a lot of lives." "A lot of lives, I tell you." "Yes, I heard of your plight. It is fortunate that you were able to get your hands on the keys to the inn. If only Command had listened." Radamai's voice faded out as his thoughts seemed to drift off. Clearly, the man had not yet completely recovered from the trauma he suffered. Lex could not even blame him. Watching a massive monster grab a hold of your planet and then suck it into a tear must have shaken up a lot of people's minds. "Unfortunately, there is a small issue," the innkeeper said softly, waking the man up from his thoughts. "Everyone who escaped is stuck here unless they attain a prestige level and teleport to another planet. Though I wish to help, I cannot break the rules of the inn, or else how can I expect others to follow? Having a way out is already good enough, not to mention the Empire is preparing camps within another minor realm to relocate everyone. with time, everyone will get a chance to leave eventually. I'm glad you have a positive outlook on this matter. The survivors are lucky to have someone like you keeping an eye out for them. Radamai only shook his head, as if he disagreed, but did not say anything. Clearly the man needed some rest as well, though it did not seem like he would be getting any in the near future. Lex left the room, and was finally free to do his own tasks, when an idea suddenly came to him. He changed out of his host attire and put on his Clark Kent glasses, before approaching Charles as Leo. He thought of a good way to test the extent of Charles's unique insight. Chapter 747 Energy Crystal. Charles was taking down notes in a notebook he was holding, while looking up at the sleeping mountain man. From time to time, he would mumble to himself, as if he was speculating about the effectiveness of certain treatments. It was only when Leo approached him and coughed, as if clearing his throat, that Charles realized that someone had arrived. I hope I'm not disturbing you, but I thought I'd introduce myself. My name is Leo, I'm the owner of the Gamer's Den store. It's a pleasure to meet you. I've heard excellent things about your expertise in medicine. I still have much to learn, Charles said humbly, though it seemed like he really meant it. The conundrum of how to treat the mountain man really had him stumped, as its size was a major factor in every treatment method he could come up with. Ultimately, without any cultivation, his methods were extremely limited. Well, now that you're one of us, you can just list down whatever you need to help you grow and the innkeeper will take care of it. It wouldn't be such a bad idea to start cultivating now, either. After all, the stronger you get, the more your capabilities will grow. If the innkeeper can help, that would be great, but I'm afraid it's not so easy for me to cultivate due to my unique physique. I can't absorb normal spirit energy. I need highly concentrated spirit energy found only in extremely pure crystals. That's not the same as spirit stones as. Before Charles could continue to describe what he needed, Lex was reminded of something and summoned out an energy crystal from his spatial bangle. In the crystal realm, this was a very valuable energy resource used for cultivation by Earth immortals and the crystal race. The energy stored within was even more dense, as well as more pure, than even the highest grade spirit stone that Lex had ever seen, not that he really used those for cultivation anymore. After all, the environment at the inn was more than enough to meet his needs. Charles, though, was stumped when he saw the crystal in Leo's hand. This was not something he expected to find any time soon, as these energy crystals were only formed in the early years of a realm's life. They were available in limited amounts in any realm, and could not typically be replenished even across the remainder of a realm's lifespan. Is this what you need? Leo asked, quite casually, waking Charles from his stupor. How did you get that? They're unbelievably rare. In fact, they should have all been used up billions of years ago. I wouldn't say they're common, but in one of the realms that the Midnight Inn is connected to, they can be easily accessed by a person with a certain level of connections. At least, that's the case in the one other realm I've been to. It's possible that it's even more common in other realms. Charles was dumbfounded. When he heard that the inn catered to guests from across the universe, he took that as more of a spiritual saying or mantra than something literal. How could he imagine that the inn is actually linked to other realms? But he quickly suppressed his shock and focused on the matter at hand. If he could get his hands on these crystals, it would be possible for him to quickly raise his cultivation. He was confident of becoming an immortal within a decade, if not sooner. But the problem right now was that he had no collateral with which he could bargain, and no resources with which he could purchase these crystals. How can I get my hands on some of these crystals? With them, I can begin cultivating immediately. Well, the inn will pay you a salary in MP, and you can use that at the guild room to request these energy crystals. But that may take you some time, or you can get them from me. I don't really need MP as repayment, though. Do you have anything else you can pay me with? Charles clenched his fists as he racked his brain, trying to come up with a solution. The only thing of value he had was his knowledge. Was that something Leo would be interested in? The only thing I can pay you with is certain knowledge. Or maybe I can treat you if you're ill. Lex paused. Both options weren't bad. He wanted to know about Charles's secrets, but at the same time, treatment was also something he was looking forward to. We can come up with an arrangement. I do seek treatment, but I'm not entirely sure you're able to address what ails me. If that's the case, you can trade an interesting secret. If I think it's worth it, I'll give you the crystal. Don't worry, I won't be unfair on purpose. Charles agreed all too quickly. At first, when he had no hope of cultivating anytime soon, he had all the patience in the world. But now that the prize was dangling in front of his eyes, he could scarcely control himself. What Lex wanted treated were the inscriptions hidden within his body, but he had doubts that Charles could even detect them at his current stage. That's why he was so interested in having Charles cultivate and improve his capabilities. Feeling fairly confident, Charles inspected Leo's boy and discovered nothing. He did not recognize Leo as Lex, despite having treated him before, because the effects of the Clark Kent glasses were quite thorough. Charles frowned and investigated for a while longer, before eventually giving up. I can't discover anything wrong with you, he admitted, feeling slightly tense. In that case, an interesting secret it is. Though I advise you to choose carefully. Revealing a mundane secret, like your current crush, will not really be worth an energy crystal. Charles felt like Leo was teasing him on purpose. How could he possibly have a crush on anyone? He'd hardly met any elf so far. Chapter 748 Cosmic Dark Age. Charles eyed the energy crystal greedily, and his mind raced as he considered various things. He did not know Leo's character, and although he was inclined to believe in a colleague, it was best to be sure. What are some topics that interest you? If you provide me with some guidance, I can better choose what to reveal. What interested him? There were truly too many things, but none of them were topics ordinary folk could come into contact with. But then again, since he was testing Charles to begin with, there was no point in mentioning something simple. He thought for a moment about what topics he had been considering lately. I have many random interests, so I'll just list them out. These days I've been wondering a lot about how a realm is formed, and what happens after it is created. I've also been wondering, what is space really? If space itself is torn, how can there be something behind it? I've also been thinking about deities, and how they come to be. Why do they need worshippers? Can anyone become a deity if they're worshipped enough? Oh yes, I was also wondering where lightning tribulations come from, and why they're the same across multiple realms. Is it a coincidence? I've also... Alright, that's enough, Charles said, before Lex really began listing out all the random thoughts he'd had recently. To Charles, these really could only be random thoughts, for how could they be relevant to someone at Lex's cultivation level? These were extremely high-level concepts that not even immortals had the right to ponder. Fortunately, Charles was in the unique position to answer not just some of them, but all of them. Of course, he would not so easily reveal these answers, for that would present problems of their own. After all, how could a mortal know the secrets of the heavens? I cannot say how a realm is formed, but as luck would have it, I coincidentally learned some information about the early years of a realm's existence, Charles said, as he cleared his throat. He also looked around to ensure they were alone, and once he was satisfied, continued. Each realm is different, but what they have in common is that they are born with a massive burst of energy. This initial energy is the purest form of energy in the universe, chaos energy. But because of its potency, it is also too dangerous and is akin to poison to most beings. Only the strongest of immortals, as well as some unique beings, can tolerate this form of energy. The first phase of a realm's life is converting that extremely pure and powerful energy into various more tolerable and gentle forms of energy. This period is known as the Cosmic Dark Age, as hardly any life can exist during this time. But any being and anything that is born or formed during this time are exceptionally powerful or valuable. That is because they undergo the tempering of the foremost energy in the universe, so it is only natural. Charles knew much more, but he stopped speaking at that point. He had already revealed a lot, and surely it was already worth more than just a single energy crystal. Lex had been listening closely. Although he could not confirm if what Charles said was true, the information he had revealed was very important. If the energy when the new realm was formed was poisonous, how could he host guests? Although he was fairly certain that the system itself would manage to keep guests from being passively harmed by the environment, as it did with cultivators' natural auras, he also had to take precautions. After all, he clearly remembered being told to be prepared when he was told that the new realm would be born in 2 years' time. He nodded to Charles, as if saying he accepted this little tidbit of information, and calmly handed in 10 energy crystals. Although he did not have many on hand, he had more than enough to cater to Charles's needs for the moment. After all, Farty wasn't the only one who had received a lot of gifts during the wedding. If you need more in the future, you can reach out to me. We'll have the same deal, said Lex, before he teleported away. Now that he was done with this, he was heading towards the Emporium to pick up a package he had been anticipating for a while. Nulled cosmic cloud. A furious battle was taking place in what was once a natural paradise. The burnt and crisp remains of some kind of orchard could still be seen here and there, though mostly all one would see were corpses. This was a battlefield where the Henali forces had been losing badly, and for once, even the arrival of the Midnight Battalion did not change that. But how could it? The battalion consisted only of foundation-level cultivators, but the enemies were the absolute elites of the Golden Core realm. On one side was a massive army that the battalion was reinforcing, and on the other side only a few dozen bipedal beasts, yet the favor of the battle seemed to be on the beasts' side. More reinforcements were due, but they would have to survive long enough for that to happen. Fortunately, despite the dire situation, none from the battalion had died, though this time the credit remained solely with their formidable attire. In the midst of battle, Z made use of his space affinity to disrupt an attacking beast, but for some strange reason, instead of forming a barrier in space, space itself was torn. Though that was not his intention, it seemed to serve the purpose as the beast quickly retreated to avoid the tear. His allies breathed a sigh of relief and continued the fight, but only Z frowned as he kept looking at the tear that was already healing. Nully, that was not supposed to happen, he kept telling himself, as he wondered what had happened. Chapter 749 Silent Wanderer. Mr. Lex, you have made me wait, Powell complained, though the massive smile on his face did not belie any dissatisfaction. I've been too busy lately, Lex said with an exasperated sigh as he approached the familiar counter and leaned on it. Even as he was there now, his projection was at the inn, having meetings with countless devils who wished to meet him. Many of the meetings were actually fruitful, as they were about small or targeted events the devils wished to host. Some of them were just about the devils wishing to make themselves known to the Innkeeper and try and expand their connections. One of them was a wedding proposal by a very beautiful devil, yet Lex had to calmly reject her, stating that he did not wish to distract himself from his work. There were many more useless or actually even infuriating meetings where they tried to scam him or make use of the inn for malicious purposes, but they were still in the minority. Your package arrived long ago. Here you are, a single freshly mined dural ore straight from Phrygra. I can guarantee that it has spent no more than a few days away from that planet, and those days are entirely attributed to your own tardiness. Yes, no need for the sales pitch, this suits my needs just fine, said Lex as he took the briefcase Powell handed him and opened it to look at the bright pink ore, only partially revealing itself from the piece of stone it was within. This ore was extremely valuable across the entire realm, mostly because there were very few mines for them at all. But that's not the reason why Lex had ordered this particular ore. No, he just needed something from the planet Phrygra that still contained an aura of the planet. With that, Lex could use the item as a guide to purchase a ticket from the system that targeted that planet specifically. Like this, he would be able to teleport there with the intention of linking it to the inn. But Lex did not truly care much for linking the planet as much as he cared about treasure hunting. After all, that planet was a part of the 89 rogue planets that formed the only known belt of rogue planets within the Swirling galaxy. It was only once he had already reached there that he would consider how exactly he was going to determine if his location was correct. If it wasn't, he really had no idea how he was going to look for the relevant place. He was already late as it was. "Powell, what about my second request?" Lex asked, once he closed the briefcase. As a rich and powerful innkeeper, it was about time he got himself a respectable interstellar spaceship. "Haha, of course it is ready. After all, you gave us so much time to prepare. If we weren't able to provide you with a satisfying result, the Emporium would lose face." With that said, Powell ducked behind the counter and brought up another briefcase. Within it was a single spatial item fashioned into a necklace. Unlike other spatial equipment, this was a very special one since it was prepared specifically for just one item, the Silent Wanderer. The Silent Wanderer was a ship produced by Havelier Industries, the same company that made the Silent Knight, which had triggered Lex's deep desire for a personal spaceship. The Silent Knight was a collector's class ship, and never produced again, but the Silent Wanderer was not bad either. Although it did not boast the same capabilities as its Knight variant, it nevertheless qualified as one of the foremost coveted ships in the entire Origin realm. Lex had to place an order long in advance with the Emporium, who went through an unknown number of hurdles to have it produced. "Follow me," Powell said as he led Lex to a hangar, where he activated the spatial necklace and brought out the ship. The Silent Wanderer was metallic silver in color, yet when flying through space it appeared invisible as it would perfectly blend in with darkness and light alike. It had an incredibly sleek body, and could only support a crew of 30 humans at most. Yet where it suffered in lack of space, it more than made up for in its speed, armor, firepower, and state-of-the-art navigation systems. Although it lacked the complete self-navigation system, which would require the addition of an AI, it was the best one could get besides that. Inside the ship were 4 small yet cozy bedrooms, each with its own tiny bath, a kitchen, a large storage room, a main hall, and a cockpit. It was fueled by an extremely powerful battery that generated energy by consuming a highly radioactive ore. The battery was so dangerous that there were over 100 fail-safes built into it, not to mention an emergency ejection system for the battery in case those fail. The ship could also be piloted using alternative fuels such as spirit stones, but that would limit the ship to less than 1% of its original capabilities. "If only you accepted MP for payment," Lex softly mumbled as he rubbed his hands against the Silent Wanderer's body. This ship was an absolute beauty, but it also came with a hefty price tag. To pay for it, Lex had to liquidate nearly 39 billion MP via the guild by purchasing the highest quality of spirit stones that the Empire would sell to him. Naturally, due to the rush he was in, he suffered a great loss in the conversion rate from MP to actual physical goods, but it was what it was. One could not fret too much about the details when one was purchasing a spaceship that could travel the distance between Earth and Mars in a few hours. "This is excellent, Powell. Pack it up, and don't forget to throw in the manual. I can't wait to drive this thing." Chapter 750 Fragra. Powell looked a little reluctant to part with such a magnificent spaceship. The Silent Wanderer was a Corvette-class ship, meaning it was light and fast, but had enough of an armor and attack capability to survive if it got in a scuffle. If they ran into pirates or faced aggression from a random group, unless they had armored ships, the Wanderer would come out on top due to how high class it was. Of course, a lot also depended on the pilot. Even the best ship would not bring any decent results if piloted by an amateur. Powell, as a ship enthusiast, was also a pilot and longed to get his hands on something like the Silent Wanderer, but it was not meant to be. Perhaps in the future such a day would come, but it had not come yet. Suppressing his sigh, he put the ship back in its spatial equipment. This necklace was especially made on order at Lex's request. After all, he was going to be teleporting to places often, so if he could not carry the ship with him when he did so, it would be pointless. But the ship required a space large and stable enough so that it wouldn't get damaged, as some of its more sensitive equipment could not handle the duress of typical spatial equipment. The battery was especially a point of concern in this regard. Therefore, the specially designed spatial equipment was an absolute must. If he lost it one day, he would not be able to put the ship in any other random spatial equipment even if it had the capacity for the ship. Once withdrawn, Lex put the necklace on. He was not one for jewelry, so it was fortunate that the necklace only consisted of a thin silver chain with a flat, rod centerpiece at one end with an engraving of the silent wanderer on it. The whole thing was simple enough that Lex could wear it without feeling embarrassed. He bid Powell farewell and quickly returned to the inn. He first looked at the manual for the silent wanderer. It was equivalent to a 36,000-page PDF. Lex blinked to make sure he saw correctly, and when he received the confirmation, he made a copy and forwarded it to Cirque, the captain of the giant spaceship inside the inn. Lex would learn to pilot his own ship, of course, but it wasn't like he could pick it up in a day. It was moments like this that having the endless resources of the inn on hand came in handy. Although it would still take Cirque some time to learn, he expected it would be a lot faster than Lex. He then took out the Dural ore, and after a very long time, bought a ticket. Only this time he wasn't buying one of the random planet search tickets, but rather a focus ticket using the ore to lock onto the planet's aura. Fortunately, despite Lex's delay in collecting the ore, due to the fact that it was sealed in a perfect container, it retained the aura of the planet. When the silver-colored ticket appeared in Lex's hand, he mentally reviewed everything he knew about the planet. The planet was the only one in the belt that had life on it, though the local dominant species were not humans. In fact, there were no humans on the entire planet. Actual on-ground information on the planet was limited because it was the territory of a dragon, but the one thing that was certain was that it exported Dural ore in limited quantities. The planet had no tourism, and only very limited trade ties. Once Lex approached there, he would stand out significantly, so he would have to be discreet and stealthy. He also needed a way to confirm that he was in the correct location, but that would come later. He tore the ticket and a very familiar interface appeared in front of him. Planets available. Planet, Phrygra. Planet rating, 3-star. Planet distance, 384 sectors. Planet environment, frigid cold, perpetual darkness, multiple underground steam vents. How delightful, Lex thought to himself before confirming the only planet in the selection, and disappearing. A moment later, he found himself standing in what looked like a vacant street. For once, it seemed like he had teleported not in the wilderness, but near or in an inhabited area. There was complete darkness all around him, with the distant stars in the sky as the only source of light. He had to rely on his spirit sense mostly to get an idea of where he was, though admittedly his eyes were well adapted to the darkness as well, not to mention the fancy contact lenses. He was studying his surroundings, and trying to understand where exactly he had teleported to, when he picked up on something. To be specific, it was not his eyes, contact lenses, or even spirit sense that detected the change, but his soul sense. There was originally no one around him, but then he detected a soul pass by. It seemed like the soul detected him at the same time as he felt the presence of the soul, and changed its direction to approach him. Lex did not reveal that he had already detected the incoming being, and observed to see how the situation progressed. It was approaching him from behind, and even as it came within a few dozen feet of him, Lex could not actually see or hear the approaching entity. Was this what others experienced when Fenrir used its stealth? Lex wondered as the being came even closer, practically only a couple of feet away from him. Were it not for his soul sense, he would have had no way of knowing there was someone standing right behind him. But then, the being attacked viciously, and when it finally made contact, the being was revealed to Lex's senses. It seemed Lex needed to be touching it to perceive it. Chapter 751 Nonchalant. The creature was humanoid, though it did not resemble a human at all. In the darkness it was not possible to distinguish its color, but its back seemed to be covered in a thick and jagged carapace while its front consisted of a very thick hide, making the creature extremely durable. It did not seem to have eyes, though it most certainly had a mouth filled with extremely sharp teeth. Lex could see a few other features on its face, some of which could possibly serve the same purpose as a nose and ears, though what the rest were for was a mystery. The creature seemed intelligent, as it was wearing some kind of clothes that augmented its stealth abilities, and Lex could faintly detect surprise from the creature using his sixth sense. In its right hand was a blade that seemed like it was made from a very sharp tooth, yet its usual lethality seemed to have failed the creature today. He had tried to slice Lex's neck off in one swift motion, but his attempts were not even enough to give him a shave. The creature, instead of getting the satisfying feedback of a successful kill, was greeted with the shock of hitting an incredibly solid object. The pushback from the force in his hand nearly caused a few tendons in his fingers to rip, though they had ultimately managed to hold on. Lex only raised an eyebrow as he looked at the creature, while abject horror gripped the creature's 3 hearts. It tried to retreat as quickly as possible, but Lex was too fast for it. He reached out and grabbed the creature's hand, restricting its retreat. He squeezed slightly, making sure not to break the hand. Despite his care, the grip was tight enough that the creature lost its grip on the knife and dropped it, although it simultaneously won Lex's admiration for it had been able to suppress its scream. The creature was well trained. "I don't think we have any animosity," said Lex, calmly. "Why did you suddenly attack me?" While waiting for an answer, Lex simultaneously read the information he was getting from his fancy contact lenses. The creature was known as a fraggle, and was a local variant of a species closely related to dragons. They formed societies and communities around dragons, and worshipped them. Each and every dragon usually had its own country of such followers, who also happened to be descendants of the very dragon they served. As a virile species, dragons often mated with any suitable creature in their habitat, often giving birth to half-breeds and different variants of fraggle, who then ultimately spent their entire existence worshipping their dragon ancestor due to the heavy influence of their bloodline. But it was not as if the dragons ever actually managed their subordinates, so such creatures often formed their own societies with independent cultures and ideas, not to mention intrigue and politics. This particular fraggle, upon realizing it could not escape Lex's grip, very resolutely chopped off its own hand and retreated. But the creature had managed to take only a single step back before Lex grabbed its other hand. "Will you chop this one off too?" "But you'd need a hand to do that." "Will you bite it off?" he asked with seemingly genuine curiosity. But the more nonchalant he appeared, the more the fraggle felt afraid. Gathering up its courage, the creature leaped forward and kneed Lex in the face. He moved extremely quickly and summoned all its strength, making it so that Lex was not able to react. When his knee made contact it felt elated, but then the feeling faded when it saw that Lex remained completely unaffected. "I see you are not really in a cooperative mood," he remarked as he pondered what to do. Should he try some form of torture? How was he supposed to extract the information? After a couple of moments of thinking, during which the fraggle had been relentlessly assaulting Lex, he decided to take a different approach. He only gently twisted his hand, and the creature's arm was dislocated. He took a single step forward, managing to perfectly dodge one of the creature's attacks, and gently chopped at the fraggle's neck. Well, it was gentle by Lex's standards, but to the creature it was completely fatal. With its neck broken, the creature collapsed on the ground, bleeding out from its severed hand. Lex could not help but sniff the air. The smell of this creature's blood was unusually pungent, like rotten eggs, and would probably last for a long time. Lex made a mental note not to get any blood on himself, lest he be easy to track down if someone was searching for him. Lex searched the creature, and besides the dagger it had used to attack him, found several darts and needles, all coated with poison. Wherever this fellow was going, his motives were not pure. He once again looked around, and upon ensuring that no one had seen what happened, quickly moved away. He changed into his stealth suit, so that it was easier to hide, though he did not know how effective the suit would be here. After all, he did not know what senses these creatures used. If it was the normal hearing, touch or spirit sense, Lex had his bases covered. But if it was some other unusual sense, well then Lex would find out how good his suit really was. It only took a short while before Lex encountered other fraggles, but that made sense since he was in what appeared to be a town. Oddly enough, the mood across the whole town seemed to be extremely depressing, and filled with anxiety. Lex situated himself behind a peculiar bush that seemed unaffected by the cold and the dark, and carefully extended his spirit sense to see if he could spy on the conversations the crowd was having. He was once again trying his hand at being a spy. Only a few moments later, Lex raised an eyebrow. He just heard something interesting. Chapter 752, Son's Girlfriend's Father's Mistress. Despite the absence of light, or even eyes, the Fraggle had not forsaken the appearance of their town. The streets were wide and even, with pavement on either side. There was a surprising amount of vegetation for such a cold, dark planet, in the form of bushes that had been planted every dozen feet or so. The buildings were designed to be completely symmetrical, with an inordinate amount of design even on the outside. The use of precious ores to decorate the buildings was also a very prevalent practice. Yet as gaudy as the town appeared to be, the mood of the citizens did not seem to match. There were only a few Fraggles moving about in the streets, but each and everyone seemed like they were expecting death right around the corner. The unusual mood and the encounter with a potential assassin made Lex aware that there was something extremely unusual going on, most likely. When he extended his spirit sense from his hiding place to try and learn as much about his environment as he could, he discovered that his suspicions were entirely correct. "Do you have any confirmation yet?" one Fraggle whispered to another, speaking in their unusual language that consisted of various throaty growls. "You know how hard it is to get confirmed news, but this is as solid a lead as any we're going to get for a while. I got the news from the nephew of the neighbor of one of the palace guards. The royal family is acting extremely oddly, and the king has been to the Lord Dragon's chamber multiple times in the last few days. No one knows what's happening, but security has been drastically increased around the castle. I've heard that even the king's son from a random maid has a bodyguard now. So they are acting strange. That doesn't mean that the Lord Dragon is dead. The Lord Dragon is immortal and everlasting. These damn foreigners are causing problems for no reason, spreading such vile rumors. I say we should execute them all. I also don't believe that anything can happen to the Lord Dragon. Who doesn't know of the Lord's immoral might? But I can't help but think that something is going on. Even the king has never been allowed to enter the Lord's chamber so frequently. I think the king has finally convinced the Lord to act against the icy abominations coming from the south. As soon as the Lord makes a move, we'll finally be freed from this unrewarding war. All praise to the mighty Lord, the Fraggle exclaimed with enthusiasm. Lex listened in to a few more conversations, and understood the gist of what was happening. Suddenly and spontaneously, some foreigners appeared on the planet and began claiming that the mighty dragon had died. Such statements were received with predictable disharmony, and those foreigners were said to have been imprisoned, although the public seemed to be curious as to why they had not been publicly executed yet, as would normally be the case. Though there were very few Fraggles on the streets, most of them seemed to have the same or similar beliefs, which was that the dragon was infallible. Only after squatting in the same place for well over an hour did Lex encounter someone with a differing view. "I'm telling you. My son's girlfriend's father's mistress works as a maid in the royal palace. The royals all know that the dragon has passed on and are taking this opportunity to raid the Lord's treasury." A dragon's treasury. Although Lex was not sure how he would confirm if this planet really was the planet that the mystery man meant, if there was treasure to be found anywhere, a dragon's treasury sure sounded like the place. His original plan was to wait on this planet till the inn connects to it, after which he would begin to explore all the 89 planets using his ship's extremely thorough and powerful scanning tools. But, upon hearing the intrigue surrounding the dragon, Lex was tempted to investigate. To be clear, while the information about this planet was very limited on the Henali portal, there was slightly more information on the dragon. The first and most important thing was that all dragons, true dragons that is, were in the Earth immortal realm from the moment of their birth. It was literally the lowest level they could be at, and any dragon that claimed to be one but was below that realm was actually a mixed-breed creature that resembled a dragon. The exact realm of the dragon was unknown, but it had a strong reputation, so there was a solid chance that it was at a higher realm. Lex didn't believe an immortal could die so randomly or quietly. After all, immortal was in the name of their realm, right? But it was clear that something was definitely going on, and his curiosity had been piqued. He focused on gathering information on the location of the castle. Just to be safe, since the castle was bound to be a high-security area, Lex summoned Fenrir before the two bolted. Listen buddy, you better use your powers to the best of your abilities. There's probably going to be many immortals where we're heading. Fenrir snorted, but at the same time Lex could tell it had begun to use its full power. Although it might be foolish to head to such a dangerous location, it wasn't as if Lex was going to head straight in without a plan. First, he would take his time to scout the area out, and only after this planet had established its connection to the inn would he venture in. With his own suit, and Fenrir's remarkable abilities, they should be able to avoid attracting any attention. The only real possibility of them being detected was if there were immortals there, and Lex could only guess that there might be. At the same time, he wondered what those icy abominations that were mentioned were. There was no such information mentioned on the portal, and this planet was supposed to be under the thorough control of the dragon, so who could possibly be stirring trouble? Or did this just count as internal strife, which the dragon could not be bothered to care about? Chapter 753 Cosmic Ascendance Spectrum. The planet was, as its name subtly hinted, frigid cold. The warmest he had experienced so far was -10 Celsius, 14 Fahrenheit, and the average temperature was far below that. Lex was far beyond the point where such temperatures could affect him, but since this was a 3-star planet, even the cold was tinged with a hint of spirituality, which did make Lex feel like this place was the perfect weather for a nice nap in a cozy blanket. Yet what surprised Lex the most was that for a supposed 3-star planet, the spiritual energy was surprisingly diluted. Compared to Earth, there was a great deal more, of course, but it was still below that of the inns. Perhaps there was more to the star ranking than just spiritual energy concentration. Maybe it was the various precious ores present on the planet. Another surprising thing, though, there was a noticeable lack of snow for such a cold planet, which was strange. It would have made sense if there was no water on the planet, and the local life forms had evolved to not rely on it, but as he crossed the countryside, did they even have countries on this planet? Would this then be called planetside? Whatever. Not letting the random intrusive thought distract him, he once again began focusing on the fact that as he crossed the empty and uninhabited terrain leading towards the castle where the Lord Dragon resided, he picked up many steam vents, and even a couple of hidden hot springs deep within some caves he crossed. There was a surprising amount of flora, with roots that went deep far beyond the limit of his spirit sense. They must have adapted somehow to keep the water from freezing within them. Some of them gave off a gentle, blue light, which was the only source of light he had seen on this planet so far. From time to time, Lex would see other towns or even cities, but he managed to avoid them, though he could increasingly detect the growing acrimony even from a distance. He avoided the main roads, preferring to remain hidden. He had already encountered one assassination attempt, and the locals weren't exactly fond of foreigners at the moment, so he wouldn't be making any friends if he was spotted. Since he was in no rush, he did not mind the fact that it took him nearly 2 days to get near the castle, and even that was also only because he landed relatively close to it. It was not because the castle came into sight that Lex knew he was close, but because of a subtle pressure he felt, weighing him down. He had read about this as well, and knew exactly what it was even if he hadn't. This was Dragon's Might. Although, reading up on it had educated him on exactly what this aura was. Dragons were a race with a very high level in the natural hierarchy of existence within the universe. This was the very same hierarchy that was raised each time that a cultivator broke through, but the starting point of dragons was so high that even if a human reached the heaven immortal realm, their level might still be below that of a dragon's. It was while doing research for this very planet, and then studying the dragon, that Lex learned more about this very hierarchy, which was officially called the Cosmic Ascendance Spectrum. The Cosmic Ascendance Spectrum was a manually compiled list which denoted the usual hierarchy that a race was born with, and the significance of it was similarly explained as well. The higher along on the list one was, the more they would gain benefits from the universe itself, and be able to wield higher forms of spiritual energy. Dragons, for example, were born at the Earth immortal realm, exuded a terrific and oppressive aura known as Dragon's Might, and had an inborn affinity which allowed them to discover valuable treasures. This placed them very high up on that list. Comparatively speaking, humans had no innate advantage except their learning capabilities and adaptability, and had weak and fragile bodies. This was because they were very low on the same list. So, even if a human became an Earth immortal and faced a newborn dragon, they would be at a disadvantage or face great difficulty, because even in the same realm, they were not on the same level. That of course did not mean that humans could not overcome that difficulty and beat the dragon, just that there was an undeniable advantage that dragons would always have. This was also one of the reasons Jotun did his best not to get into a direct fight with the devils. The only fortunate thing was that beings could raise this level, not only through cultivation, but also other means, elusive though they may be. Lex's cultivation technique happened to just be one such way. As such, when Lex finally encountered the dragon's might, he did not feel the usual fear or oppression that it brought along. Instead, he just found it to be an interesting challenge. The closer they got to the castle, the stronger the effects of dragon's might became, though they were still manageable for now, for Lex and Fenrir both. But did this mean that the dragon was alive? Or could dead dragons exude the aura as well? The reason Lex was wondering such a thing was, the closer he got to the castle, more hidden assassins he discovered with his soul sense. They never saw him, and he never saw them, but he could tell that they were all headed in the same direction. If the dragon were truly alive, would these assassins really have the guts to go and pick a fight right under its nose? Or were they just trained so well that they did not care about their own life and death? Moreover, who was sending them, and what was their purpose? Since the journey was so long, Lex could not help but muse along these lines. Chapter 754 Mountain Range. As the hours passed by, and Lex came nearer to the castle, the aura grew stronger. While it was well within the range that Lex and Fenrir could tolerate, Lex found it interesting that the assassins also remained unaffected. As a subsidiary race of the dragons, weren't the Fraggles supposed to be even more vulnerable than others to this aura? Based solely on what he saw, that did not seem to be the case. As the hours wound by, another question took hold in Lex's mind. What was aura exactly? He himself had an aura, and more than one. The first and most obvious aura was that of the Innkeeper, but that originated from his host attire. It gave others great mental pressure, and within the crystal realm even affected the environment. Based on that he could study the effects that aura could bring about, but he was wondering how aura was nurtured and its effects differentiated. The second aura that Lex had was his own. It was heavily influenced by his time spent as the Innkeeper, and could evoke feelings of confidence, competence, and warmth. It was also influenced by regal embrace, which nurtured the sensation of indestructibility and gave one the confidence to face anything and everything. His state of flow, for some reason, also affected his aura from what he could tell. Lex had used his aura to influence certain actions and reactions from others, even though he did not understand it fully. Lately, he had even felt his aura grow when he was cultivating his foundations once again, as well as during the first few moments when he was fighting insects, and his fighting instincts awakening. Based on this analysis, aura could be innate, such as that of dragons, but could also be influenced by environmental factors, as well as the actions of the person who owned the aura. He wondered, did his act of biding his time and time again in the face of insurmountable opponents affect his aura, or had it not? Maybe it was because he made those decisions out of pure logic instead of fear, but there seemed to be no trace of the will to retreat in his aura yet. The more he marinated in the dragon's might and fought against the aura's effects, the more he began to wonder if he could influence the growth of his own aura, and what benefits it could bring. As an experiment, he closed his eyes and focused, summoning his aura forth in its most raw form. But he quickly discovered that such a generic state of mind caused the aura he summoned to be very loose. He summoned it, but it dispersed quickly under the impressive dragon's might. Although such a result was predictable, Lex frowned. He summoned his aura again, but this time in defiance of the dragon's might. As powerful and influential as a dragon may be, he was not insignificant either. Yes, he had the help of the system, but even the most awesome tool in the hands of an incompetent man would yield no results. He never thought less of himself for relying on the system. This time the aura he exuded was more focused, and did not disperse under the weight of the dragon's might, though it was heavily suppressed and was limited to just a few feet around him. Lex felt a subtle, additional strain on him as he maintained his aura, and felt that if he continued to fight against dragon's might in such a way, he would soon find himself drained of energy. Yet, odd as it was, he could not identify what energy was being exhausted, for it definitely wasn't his spiritual energy, nor was it any other energy he consciously cultivated. Over the next 30 hours, he continued to perform such experiments, until the castle finally appeared within sight. The castle was in fact an entire mountain range that had been carved to form the most elaborate and majestic building Lex had ever seen, and he could not even see all of it. Though, what he could see was the epic fight being fought at the foot of the mountain range. Even from a distance, Lex could tell that the conflict was between armies that were hundreds of thousands in numbers, and was incredibly fierce. Neither side had a clear advantage, and from the number of assassins who kept arriving, it seemed like the size of the fight was only destined to grow. Fortunately, the castle was extremely large, so Lex could just circumvent the fight and still approach the castle. The inn had already established its connection by now, so Lex was no longer concerned about escape. He simply continued to approach, though it seemed entering would not be as easy as he initially assumed. This close to the castle, the power of the dragon's might was practically a physical force pressing them down into the ground. Although Lex and Fenrir still had no issue resisting the aura, the sheer might of it was interfering with Fenrir's stealth abilities. The pup could no longer guarantee if they were even working at all or not, so they had to rely on conventional stealth to approach. That meant that they practically held their breaths and stepped as softly as possible during their approach, making sure to be as far as possible from any potential guards. One drawback of turning an entire mountain range into a singular castle was that there were too many areas that were left unsupervised. After they finally approached the castle, due to the pup's reluctance to depart mid-adventure, despite Lex's many assurances that he would summon it again shortly, the pair's actions gave birth to a very unusual sight. A man and a wolf climbed the vertical walls of the castle carefully as they tried to approach a window. As odd as it was, there were no protective formations anywhere around the castle. Perhaps the dragon never felt like it needed one, so they were able to enter completely unintended. Now they just had to navigate what was surely a labyrinth to find what they were looking for. Chapter 755 Introspection. Lex spread his spirit sense in the pitch-dark corridor he had entered, trying to understand the layout as well as detect any nearby fraggles. One of the most important considerations Lex had during this period was how dangerous this specific adventure was going to be. Surprisingly, so far, he had not faced any significant challenge, though Fenrir could take most of the credit for that. His instincts, too, did not warn him of any overwhelming danger looming around the corner. To be clear, there was plenty of danger about. If Lex was not careful, he could be besieged by countless fraggles, not to mention whoever they were fighting. But the 3-star planet he was on was showing a surprising lack of immortals, who were the greatest threat to Lex. Either they were not nearly as common as he had assumed, and his frequent encounters with them could be attributed to a skewed probability of facing them due to how many unusual circumstances he faced. He made a mental note to look up such information when he got back. Considering the fact that he encountered Earth immortals so frequently in the Crystal Realm, and saw so many immortals coming to his inn, Lex thought that there would be immortals anywhere with enough spiritual energy, but that might not be the case. Perhaps the tribulation also played a role in their absence. But, the most significant thing was that despite the dragons might being much stronger now, Lex's instincts still did not warn him of any lethal danger. In fact, the poison on Polbitby was about 1,000,000 times more dangerous than anything he was feeling currently. Of course, there was also the possibility that his instincts were failing him, or that they were unable to detect a certain type of threat, such as those that involved systems. Lex still had to be careful. Unable to decipher the ridiculously large labyrinth that was the interior of the castle, Lex decided to use his instincts to search for any good leads. His instincts were unable to directly tell him where to go to fulfill his purpose, but it did point him in the direction of the nearest item which could be considered a treasure. Any idea which way to go? Lex asked Fenrir, just in case the pup had any other abilities he was unaware of, but the pup only shook its head. The dragon's might was affecting it much more than Lex, and causing it to become agitated. Its general temperament was rather friendly and mild, at least in the presence of those that it trusted, but it was still feeling challenged and aggressive. It was as if the very blood in its veins was angered that a dragon was daring to display its might within Fenrir's presence. Unfortunately, regardless of how noble the instincts in its body, it was nowhere near as strong as the dragon. At least the dragon was born in the immortal realm. Fenrir, despite its noble bloodline, had been born immortal. That thought gave Lex pause. Fenrir should have had a very high position in the cosmic ascendance spectrum, so then why was its cultivation at birth so low? Why was it still unable to speak, even if only through spirit sense? The mysteries surrounding the pup were not few, but right now was not the time to ponder them. Without any other lead, Lex decided to move in the direction of the nearest treasure. The corridor was, just as the fragile town had been, elaborately decorated across every inch of its length. Precious ores had been used to add color to the carvings in the walls, even if no one could see those colors in the dark, and spirit stones had been embedded every so often, keeping the ambient energy within the castle high. Lex felt like he had encountered something he had no knowledge of, for there were no formations in place, nor did the alignment of rooms or corridors seem like they merged to form a massive character, like in Valesco, but the deeper he walked into the castle the more impressive it seemed. The spirit energy was the least of it. It seemed like every step he was taking, he was walking on the physical manifestation of history itself. Countless beings of incredible importance had once passed through these halls, and world-shaking decisions had been made in nearly every room. Although Lex did not have enough information to judge, he guessed that perhaps the influence of the dragon whose home he was walking in was larger than he had first thought. Maybe the dragon held a great position in this galaxy, but information of that level would not be easily available on the Henali portal. For a massive portal that was supposed to cover the majority of the explored realm, it was surprisingly strictly monitored and controlled. Also, now that Lex knew a lot more about the universe, the size of the origin realm surprised him greatly. After all, long before Lex knew of the concept of realms, he assumed the origin realm was the entire universe. It was then that Lex came across the concept of the known universe, which should now accurately be called known realm. This was because a large part of even the origin realm remained unexplored. Lex did not know if such a term counted the Henali as well, or if they truly had explored the entire realm, but he definitely knew that the devils, at least, had not explored the entire realm yet. Lex suddenly stopped, and frowned. He noticed something unusual. He was undergoing a lot more introspection than usual, and his thoughts seemed to be becoming more and more random. Why was he thinking about the origin realm while exploring a potentially dangerous castle? Something was silently influencing him, and he had not even noticed. When exactly did this start? Was it when he first entered this planet, or did it only begin after he started to resist the pressure of dragon's might? Chapter 756, Watching the Show. It did not take long for Lex to realize that his thoughts had been a lot more random since the very moment he arrived on the planet, long before he began to contest against the dragon's might. But he still could not be sure this was caused by something external. After all, he could just be in a thoughtful mood. Moreover, he had felt no threat, nor perceived any lapse in his attentiveness to danger or his surroundings. At most, he was just a little more pensive than usual. Lex made a mental note to focus on his state of mind a little more while he was here, and continue his journey. He was a lot more observant towards the interior of the castle as he moved deeper into the labyrinth, and finally noticed two things. First, if he moved away from the outer wall of the castle, and ventured towards its depths, there was a slight decline in all paths. It was as if he was slowly descending into the bowels of the castle. Second, the temperature was increasing the deeper he went. Soon, the two encountered their first door. The halls, which had built up the castle so far, had all been open and interconnected, forming an open outermost layer. But it seemed they were about to enter the second layer of the castle. Lex prepared for trouble as he attempted to open it, but surprisingly found that there was no problem at all. The door, which was nearly 20 feet, 6 meters, large, opened easily, leading to yet another series of halls. But these halls contrasted from the previous ones in that they were filled with various carpets, decorations, statues, paintings, and more. There were also some fraggles patrolling, though they all looked incredibly weary and exhausted, as if they had not rested in a long while. Despite their drained condition, Lex could tell that they were doing their best to be as attentive as possible. If it weren't for Fenrir, Lex would not have been able to escape their scrutiny. Or the detection of the few assassins he saw as well. What the hell was going on, and how were there so many assassins with such incredible stealth capabilities? If it weren't for his soul sense, Lex would never know about them. In fact, even Fenrir had failed to detect them. As it happened, one of the assassins seemed to be going in the same direction as Lex, so perhaps he would get an answer soon. As the odd group navigated the ostentatious halls, Lex could not help but wonder what the life of an assassin was like. Did they have friends? Did they like to read books or watch plays? Did they snack from time to time? He imagined that, regardless of the stereotype of being cold-blooded, they would need to enjoy life sometime, right? He wondered if assassins got married and had little assassin babies. The thought was so odd that Lex once again caught himself, and realized that his thoughts had wandered again. He frowned, and redoubled his efforts to stay attentive. Soon they reached the room Lex's instincts were guiding him to, and it seemed like it was occupied. A couple of fraggles were inside talking, though Lex found it difficult to assess their age and genders just by observing them. It was tough to do these things with a race he had only just met. He moved closer to try and hear what they were saying, as did the assassin. "Is only a matter of time," said one of them. "Is it really? It's already been weeks, and my memory has not recovered, nor has anyone else's. No one knows what truly happened, and the royal family is acting too strangely. How do you expect them to react? Who could have predicted that an army of those icy abominations would suddenly rise from the ground and attack the castle? They have to fight with all their efforts, or if the Lord Dragon is disturbed, the royal family will be too ashamed to continue on living. I don't know why the Lord Dragon doesn't just kill them with a single swipe. It's been over 6 months since these creatures suddenly appeared in the south, and they've been a growing nuisance since." Lex was immediately intrigued. Over 6 months was the translation of what the fraggle had actually said, and it had automatically been translated into terms that Lex was familiar with. The more important thing was that the timing seemed to be similar to when the mysterious man had told Lex to come here. "More than those icy creeps, I wish the royal family would just kill those foreigners. How dare they blaspheme the great lord by claiming he has died? Can they not feel the magnificence of his aura gracing this world with its presence?" One of the fraggles, the one fanatically praising the dragon, grabbed something from its belt that immediately attracted Lex's attention. It was a strange orange-colored vine that was emitting a soft glow. The vine had been snipped off of wherever it originally grew, and was dying, but nonetheless it gave off an intimidating aura. This was exactly the thing that his instincts had guided him to. Lex was not the only one who noticed the vine, as the assassin started to make his way towards the fraggle as soon as he brought out the vine. Instead of interfering in the matter, Lex decided to just sit and watch. He was interested in learning what exactly was going on here, and perhaps observing their interaction would give him some clues. As soon as the assassin came close, something unbelievable happened. The light emitted from the vine actually managed to reveal the assassin's figure, alerting the two fraggles of the intruder. Immediately, they began fighting one another without holding anything back. In the corner of the room, Lex and Fenrir comfortably sat on a couple of sofas and watched the fight as Lex summoned out a bag of Doritos. "Want some?" he offered the pup as he pointed the open bag towards him. Very politely taking out a pair of chopsticks, so as to not dirty its paw, it took a few. That was the moment Lex realized his pup also had a spatial treasure, N. Chapter 757 Interesting Assassin. "When did you get a spatial treasure?" asked Lex, not hiding his surprise. "Actually, where did you get one from?" The pup had originally not felt like this was a big deal, but seeing how Lex reacted, it suddenly felt prideful. He growled and barked as it communicated with Lex, yet the man seemed to understand everything. The oddest part was that no one noticed the two talking, and not just because the other three in the room erupted into a battle for life and death. "Oh, that's an unusual bloodline ability," Lex commented. Apparently, after Fenrir finished his task inside the tower, the reward he had received was information on how to unlock his bloodline abilities as quickly as possible. Fenrir had begun to implement that knowledge, which was beginning to unlock more and more of his bloodline abilities. The particular one he used was not exactly equivalent to having a spatial treasure, although the effects were similar in a limited capacity. It created small folds within Fenrir's fur, which seemed to be linked to some unknown domain. For now, Fenrir could store small items in that domain, although it was best not to store anything too private as, technically, that domain could be accessed by anyone with similar abilities. This bloodline ability was a part of a more powerful ability to be unlocked later on, though Fenrir did not know or care about that. It just liked putting anything and everything within that space. So far, besides chopsticks, he had put a lot of mud, some rocks, and other random small objects. Lex listened in with interest as he watched the Fraggles fight. Although the fight had just begun, it was almost over as well. Although the assassin had lost the element of surprise, his combat ability was nothing to belittle. The two random workers were not its match, although the assassin also suffered some injuries. A few minutes later, everything was concluded. Lex watched with interest as the assassin ate the glowing vine excitedly. If eating the vine had any effects, they were not apparent. Besides the glow disappearing, resulting in the assassin once again turning invisible, Lex noticed nothing significant. However, that quickly changed when the assassin disabled his invisibility on his own a few moments later. He sat down in a corner, as if to rest, and took out a small device and began speaking into it. "I've infiltrated into the first layer of the castle, but have received injuries. I will need to recover before I can continue to proceed further. Please be advised, I encountered an unknown object that can disable invisibility when exposed to its radiation. Let the others know, in case such means are applied throughout the castle. I have still discovered no signs of any of the members of the royal family." Lex felt that the assassin was being deceitful in his report, for if the object had really been unknown, he would not have proceeded to eat it, right? At least Lex discovered that the objective of the assassin seemed to be the royal family, quite predictably. Acknowledged. If recovering from your injuries will take too long, retreat instead. Your band of neglect can only allow you to tolerate the dragon's might for so long. The closer you are to the entity, the faster it will be drained. Affirmative, the assassin replied, and put the device away. But then he continued to act suspiciously. Instead of focusing on healing, he approached one of the Fraggles he killed and stabbed them with a particularly demonic blade. The blade began to absorb the entire body, and after a few moments, it completely vanished. The assassin, instead, began to morph just a bit, and moments later assumed an appearance identical to the Fraggle that had been absorbed. Or at least, Lex felt like he did. With these unusual creatures, it was very difficult for him to distinguish facial features. But the assassin was not done acting suspiciously. He then stabbed himself once as well, though with a different knife, and allowed himself to bleed out a little, before cauterizing the wound. Lex and Fenrir exchanged looks, before returning their attention to the assassin, who was not limping away. Before he left, however, he took out his small communication device, and crushed it. Naturally, Lex followed the assassin. Considering that he had no idea how to navigate these halls, and didn't know where to go, following this suspicious person may lead to some unexpected rewards. Unlike Lex, the assassin seemed to know exactly where he was going, and soon ran into guards. "Assassins have infiltrated. They are searching for Her Majesty Sishan. You have to let her know at once," the assassin pleaded, as if the very meaning of his struggle was to send the warning. Quite conveniently, he also collapsed just as he found the guards. They immediately checked on his wounds and discovered something quite serious. Although he seems to have cauterized the wound, he did not manage to stop his internal bleeding. Immediately bring him to get treated, I will go and warn Her Majesty. The group of guards split up, and Lex now had the option to either follow the guard to whoever the Scythian was, or continue to follow the assassin. After a moment's deliberation, he felt like the assassin was just diverting attention, and that his motives lay elsewhere. Ultimately, Lex decided to keep following the group with the assassin. Considering the urgency of the situation, the group moved quickly, and Lex found himself entering deeper and deeper into the castle. The temperature had almost risen to above freezing, which was quite a big deal for a planet with no star nearby. Just as they reached the makeshift hospital, which was filled with countless other patients, the castle trembled, and many decorations fell on the floor. Everyone in the room froze, as fear suddenly gripped them. Something had attacked the castle? Was the Lord Dragon going to be disturbed? The castle trembled again, and this time it was much worse. Chapter 758 Discovered. Neither Lex nor Fenrir were disturbed by the quaking, but all the fraggles in the room seemed to lose their souls. Cabinets shook, the walls creaked, and dust fell from the ceiling, but fortunately there was no destruction. The tremors from the explosion eventually vanished, but nobody in the room dared to move. It seemed like even the dying patients stopped dying for this duration, but in actuality they were just too frightened to release their pain-filled moans. But nothing seemed to happen. The dragon's might did not waver, and there were no massive repercussions, at least as far as Lex could tell. Slowly, the doctors began to move once again, as if testing if there would be a reaction. When nothing happened, they quickly started to tend to their patients again. In that short, momentary pause, however, everyone was too occupied to notice that the assassin had left the stretcher he had been placed on, and moved through the crowd, somehow changing his attire as he did. Everyone other than the two specifically paying attention to him. From the hospital, the assassin continued, moving at a much faster pace. Lex did not know why he no longer used his invisibility, but considering that Lex had not encountered any other assassin this deep in the castle, perhaps it was not possible. The longer he followed, the faster the assassin became, as if he was feeling anxious about something and running out of time. After nearly an hour passed, they once again crossed into a new layer of the castle, and suddenly the nouveau riche grandeur that filled every corner of the castle suddenly changed. From the finest marble floors and walls lined with statues, the castle changed to look like it was a natural cave. There was no even flooring, no decoration, and no signs that this was a part of a castle. The cave was also quite warm, by the planet's standards. As he had completely run out of time, the assassin broke into a run without caring about alerting anyone with his actions. His destination, as it turned out, wasn't far. In a small, branching cave, a small group seemed to be waiting for the assassin. There were a few corpses tucked neatly atop one another, so as to be out of the way. "You took too long," one of the awaiting accomplices exclaimed angrily. "It was worth it. I discovered something incredible. Those icy abominations have made their way to the castle. While the forces of the noble families fight against the royal family on the west side, the main members of the royal family have gone to the north to fend off those monsters. The central chambers will be completely unattended. We have to move before others figure this out as well." "Good job, that's valuable information. If that's the case, we don't need to waste time sneaking around. We'll recover the time lost, and then some." "What about the king? Any news on the geezer?" "No, but I think we should proceed as if he's still in the dragon's chamber. Based on this information, we can alter our plans a little. Disable all unnecessary treasures and conserve as much energy as possible. From here on out, our top priority should be resisting the dragon's might. The more time we save, the longer we'll be able to resist the might once we're inside the chamber, and each second in there is literally worth billions of soul stones." Everyone in the group nodded, and each of them seemed to disable an active technique. To Lex's great surprise, the previous group of fraggles began to change. What replaced them were 12 stocky dwarves. Once all of them were ready, the leader of the group brought them to a formation he had drawn using the blood and organs taken from the nearby corpses. Completely unaffected by the scene, everyone got in the formation, Lex and Fenrir included. If it were anything else, Lex might have hesitated, but he had seen enough teleportation formations to recognize one, even if it was made from blood and guts. The leader tried to activate the formation, but for some reason it wouldn't activate. He frowned, but did not waste too much time and took out a few more items from a bag and adjusted the formation a bit. Why is it using more energy than normal? He muttered to himself, but did not ponder over it. They didn't have long to begin with. The teleportation formation activated, and they disappeared. When they reappeared, they were inside what looked like a massive cavern that was actually quite hot, but Lex did not have the time or energy to focus on that. The intensity of dragons might had increased so drastically that Lex felt like he had been punched in the gut. Even with all of Lex's incredible defenses, at this point he felt the influence of the aura as a physical force pressing him down and squishing him like a bug. Fenrir, too, was unable to escape the sudden change, and for a few moments his abilities were interrupted. As soon as he readjusted to the pressure, the pup reactivated its abilities, and turned to look at the dwarves. Fortunately for them, it seemed like the dwarves were taking the pressure much worse than both of them. The dwarves were all in the golden core realm, with only the leader in the nascent realm, so it made sense that they were not able to immediately recover. They noticed something amiss, but by the time they recovered enough to check, Lex and Fenrir had once again disappeared. Lex used harden and other defensive techniques, but nothing seemed to reduce the effects of the aura on him or Fenrir. The dwarves, who had some kind of treasure that reduced the effects of dragon's might, did not seem much better off than them either. "How the hell does anyone tolerate this pressure?" one of the dwarves asked, wiping some blood off from the corner of his mouth. "Normal fraggles cannot," the leader explained, as he looked suspiciously in Lex and Fenrir's direction. "Only the royal family can tolerate this pressure." "Why else do you think there is a royal family to begin with? Are they really royal?" "No, they're just glorified servants to the dragon. No one else can tolerate being this close to the dragon and still maintaining normal body function. Now let's go." The dwarves followed their leader as he proceeded down one of the paths, seeming certain of his direction. For once, though, Lex and Fenrir did not follow them immediately. With so much pressure on them, it was hard for Fenrir to maintain his stealth, so they would need to resort to regular means, following them in the dark from a distance. But while Lex was still capable of doing that, upon closer observation, it did not seem like Fenrir was in the condition to do so. It was not the pressure itself that was getting to Fenrir, but now that the strength of the might had increased, so had Fenrir's aggressiveness. His thoughts were getting clouded by the desire to lash out at anyone and everyone nearby as his blood rebelled against the overbearing might. Ultimately, Lex had no choice but to send Fenrir back to the inn. But, since the pup still felt reluctant to leave, Lex promised to summon him as soon as there was a fight. After all, there was no problem with him being aggressive if there were actual enemies to target. Even without Fenrir, Lex was wearing his stealth suit made from Orion scales, so he was sure as long as he kept his distance, he would not be discovered. Unfortunately, Lex was not too familiar with the dwarven race, so he overlooked the fact that they had a unique racial trait that gave them an incredibly strong affinity with stones, ores, gems, and minerals. Although he was undetectable from this distance, the short while he and Fenrir lost their invisibility left detectable traces on the floor. The leader had picked them up, and though he did not let it show, he began preparing for the worst. Once the group was far enough down their path that they were almost out of sight, Lex began following them. Even though his vision was restricted due to the darkness, Lex could still see a little. Silently he followed the group, quite pleased with his decision to follow the assassin, when he felt a strange tremor. With a warning from his instincts, Lex quickly leaped back, just in time to avoid a cave-in in the tunnel he was walking through. He frowned. The cave-in happening right above him was too coincidental, so it was safe to say that he had been detected. He was not too surprised, though he wished that the group had fought him instead of running away. Then he could have interrogated them at least. With his guide separated from him, Lex had no choice but to once again rely on his instincts as he began randomly walking down another tunnel. Simultaneously, he began to think about the dragon. The dwarves didn't seem worried about it at all, so were they the foreigners claiming the dragon was dead? If so, how could one explain the dragon's might? Chapter 759 Lost in Thought. Unlike his first impression of the castle, which was grand and majestic if a little overdone, the cavern he was in now seemed like a long-forgotten corner of the world filled with naught but darkness. There was no sign of anyone having ever crossed the various tunnels, nor that they had been used for any purpose. If Lex had not followed the dwarves here, and clearly felt the increasing dragon's might, he may have assumed that he had teleported to a tunnel in the middle of the planet that had never been discovered. Even the increasing temperature felt like to him that he was moving closer to the layer of molten lava deep under the surface of the planet. As he made his way through, following naught but his instincts to guide him, Lex felt something he hadn't in a long time. He used his thumb to wipe his brow, and discovered sweat. It had been a long time since he sweat naturally. Considering his cultivation, there must be something extremely unusual about the temperature. Lex continued to explore, his thoughts often getting lost in random and seemingly unrelated topics, despite his best effort to focus. The situation was so strange that it took a couple of minutes before Lex realized that, while walking, he had encountered what should be an extremely large vein of rare ores. They were emitting spiritual energy, as if they had an unlimited amount stored within, and were sizzling to touch. Intrigued, he put on his fancy contact lenses, and was startled by the result. This was not an ore, but frozen dragon blood. What felt sizzling to Lex was actually well below the freezing point of the dragon's blood. Why was there so much of it seemingly mixed in with the tunnel walls? Although he didn't have an answer, Lex broke off a few large chunks before adding them to his spatial bangle. Even if he didn't know that this would be extremely valuable, it might come in handy for Xeon, who was attempting to become a dragon. He considered grabbing more, but he didn't want to waste all his time here. He had a strong feeling that he could find even more valuable things, so long as he kept looking. He had only just begun to move forward when he detected faint tremors in the walls. He touched the tunnel wall, to be sure, and indeed felt faint vibrations. They were not constant and were sometimes stronger or weaker. Someone was fighting nearby, most likely the dwarves. Having finally found a trace, he quickly began to traverse the tunnels once again. Every time he was presented with various choices as two or more paths appeared, he always selected the ones heading towards the signs of fighting. More than once, he came across dead ends, so he would just turn back and keep on trying. Once, long ago, he read that if he ever got lost in a maze, he should either pick a direction, right or left, and always turn the same way. He would eventually find a way out of the maze. Although Lex did not yet start feeling like he was trapped in a maze, if he kept roaming around randomly like this, he might just have to try it. Lex sniffed as he picked up a strange scent, and a few moments later, he saw something unusual. A corpse lay on the floor, though its death had not been recent. Lex could smell the rot and decay that had gripped the corpse. When he approached, he discovered that its situation was even worse than he imagined. There was little other than bone left on the corpse, meaning it had to have been here for months at the very least. Unwilling to touch the rotting corpse, Lex used his spirit sense to investigate it but could not determine the cause of death, which was not too shocking considering its state. He looked down the tunnel, and in the distance, detected another such corpse. One need not be an expert to know that something was amiss with the situation, but Lex could not guess what happened at all. It seemed more and more likely that the dragon was dead, or critically injured at the very least. But how had such a powerful being died so simply? How had the royal family survived when the dragon had died? Not to mention these old corpses that he was encountering. Most importantly, did any of this have to do with the treasure that he was supposed to be looking for? While Lex tried to reconstruct what exactly happened, he never stopped moving. At some point, the tremors stopped, but Lex did not even notice. His mind was completely focused on trying to reconstruct what had happened here, based on the few clues that he had. At some point, He had gone from walking through a natural tunnel to what seemed like it had been carved out of solid rock by hand. Torches hung on the sides, but Lex no longer noticed as he was too deeply lost in his thoughts. At some point, he reunited with the dwarves, who looked bloodied and battered. Unlike him, they were not completely lost in thought, and still retained their awareness thanks to the help of various treasures, but they were still too distracted to pick up on the few signs Lex revealed of himself despite wearing his stealth suit. They walked past more skeletons, and this time even a few fresh corpses. One of them even belonged to a royal family member. It was easy to distinguish them from common fraggles, as they had a long, thick tail and some of them even had wings. Finally, they reached the end of the tunnel network, and by then, the dwarves had completely lost themselves in their thoughts, despite their various protective treasures. After all, since they were not being negatively affected in any way, it was very hard for a normal protective treasure to identify their situation as encountering some kind of threat. A massive door hundreds of feet in height lay waiting for them, and it was conveniently slightly ajar, leaving just enough space for them to fit through. Lex was walking towards the opening when a sudden noise woke him from his thoughts. A painful groaning and squealing filled the tunnel, coming from one of the dwarves. He had been already extremely wounded, which combined with the pressure of the dragons might finally got to him. His leg fractured and deformed, causing him to stumble. The pain woke him from his stupor, but other than Lex, no one else noticed his cries. More than concerned about the dwarf, Lex suddenly became alert over how he had reached here. He had no recollection of the path he took, or even of reuniting with the dwarves. Whatever was happening was clearly affecting even his spirit. He employed every defensive technique he knew to protect his mind and spirit, but he felt no change whatsoever. "Barley! Barley, don't leave me," yelled the dwarf to his companions while trying to get up, only for one more of his bones to break. But it was for naught, as his companions soon crossed the massive door, all blissfully unaware of their companion's pain, or their own bleak prospects. "Damn it," the dwarf roared as he tried to push his fallen body upright, but was unable to. Before the dwarf could try again, he felt a hand grab him by the back of his collar and lift him up. A human who had been standing beside him this entire time seemed to become visible to him, studying him and his condition. "Unhand me, you dash!" Before the dwarf could complete his sentence, Lex let go, dropping the dwarf back onto the ground. Initially, he was planning on threatening the dwarf, but seeing as how his situation was so dire, Lex did not feel the need to put in any effort at all. All the spirit energy in his body had dried up, and there were multiple hairline fractures across his body, under the strain of the dwarf's heavy armor. It would be a miracle if the dwarf was even able to sit up straight without help at this point. Lex had just begun to wonder what could have happened to the dwarf when he suddenly caught himself again, and refocused. "Mary, every few minutes check up on me, and make sure I'm not lost in thought. There's something very unusual going on here, and I have no way of defending against it," he told his ever-present holographic companion. "Sure, will do," said Mary, diverting her attention from the inn to observe Lex. Usually, she was not one for gossip or shipping people, as Velma liked to call it. But given the recent developments at the inn, she couldn't help but join Velma as she eyed Dr. Charles, and one of the inn's other relatively new employees, Hera. Lex, reassured that he would not get lost in thoughts again for too long at least, turned his attention back to the dwarf. "It seems like you need some help," Lex said, hoping he didn't have to resort to threats. Those kinds of things really suited Luther more. Chapter 760 Obsession. The dwarf was an inch short of 4 feet, 1.2 meters, but his stature did not deprive him of a powerful presence. His body was thick with muscle, that much was clear even under all the hair that covered him, and his braided bear that was nearly as tall as him radiated an impressive aura of its own, as if a hidden power lay within. The dwarf was in the golden core realm, and Lex could tell that if he were in his prime condition he would be a level above normal human golden core cultivators. But Lex was not a human cultivator to begin with, let alone the fact that the dwarf was now completely drained of energy as well as thoroughly beaten. The dwarf looked at Lex and grimaced, the dirt and blood on his face only serving to make him look more detestable. Lex, on the other hand, began wondering why he once again found himself in a situation where he felt like a villain. Did he have some kind of affinity with being evil? Should he give it a try? Me bones are shattered, and if I don't fix them soon the weight of the dragons might just end up killing me directly. If you want anything from me, you're gonna have to fix me first, the dwarf finally said, before aggressively spitting out some blood. Lex raised an eyebrow. Well, at least it was a start. He quickly thought of how he could help the dwarf. He had learned some very basic healing techniques that could be used on others, but they were just barely enough to save someone's life in a critical situation. They could not be used to actually heal. He had a few boxes full of painkillers in his spatial bangle now, as he had decided he got injured all too often despite his ridiculous defense and no longer wanted to deal with a lot of pain. He had a few herbs that could serve as a healing agent, but their effects weren't too strong. Shaking his head, Lex decided to keep things simple. He threw a high-quality spirit stone at the dwarf, indicating he should replenish his energy a little so he doesn't immediately die, and simultaneously began to form an array. There's no need to be so grumpy. It's not like we're enemies or anything. I just have a few questions. I can help you out as long as you give me answers. The array was completed, and was one of the simplest ones he knew for healing purposes. It did not actually heal at all, but just added a bit of vitality to a being, allowing their body to naturally heal itself, or to not die so quickly based on the circumstances. What do you take me for? The dwarf asked angrily. Give me proper medicine and dash. Before the dwarf could complete its sentence, he found a foot pressing down on his throat, and Lex's amicable smile had withdrawn. Instead, Lex now wore a look of complete indifference as he looked down on the dwarf, a trace of an oppressive aura leaking from him, despite the dragon's might destroying all auras in the area. Do not take my politeness for subservience. If you do not want to cooperate, then I see no reason to let you live. His tone was placid and uninterested, as if the dwarf's life or death meant nothing to him. In actuality, Lex was just trying out the evil persona he had been wondering about earlier. Although Lex did not see himself as a villain, or an evil person, his recent experiences in the crystal realm made him realize that, to a degree, being civil and polite sometimes made him seem like a pushover. When he was in Valesco, no matter what, if he had had enough deterrence that crystal race member would not have attacked him. Similarly, when the Craven attacked his tavern, all of his workers and many of his guests had been injured, but the Earth Immortals he had been meeting with never really bothered to lend him a hand, and the two birds even began negotiating with the Craven right in front of him. Although things had ended well for him eventually, that bitterness and frustration had lingered, if only just a bit. So, while Lex had no real interest in being harsh with others, he also wanted to try and do things differently, and see what the results were. After all, he was just 24 years old, and it was alright if he was still figuring himself out. The dwarf was not an easily intimidated person, usually, but looking at Lex's eyes, he really felt like the other would kill him without any hesitation if he tested his limits. Although getting answers might be helpful to him, it was not important enough that he would tolerate the dwarf's misbehavior. The dwarf felt a chill in the back of his spine, and he suddenly stopped resisting. No matter what his identity was normally, right now he was just an injured dwarf held down by the other person's shoe. He needed to adapt to his new reality quickly. Ask your questions, he said hoarsely, before he finally felt the pressure from the other's foot on his neck decrease. That's more like it. Let's start with something simple. What's your name? Lex asked, a hint of a warm expression returning to his face. Nov/LB, 1N. Terrell. Terrell Folkinson, the dwarf said, hoping that the other might recognize his name, but alas, Lex knew nothing of dwarfs, and so the name meant nothing to him. See, that wasn't so hard now, was it? Asked Lex as he removed his foot from the dwarf's neck completely. You look pretty beaten up, Terrell, and your friends didn't look much better either. What happened? Terrell clenched his teeth as the recent memory filled his mind, tormenting him. The Frigel royal family was supposed to be gone. This level of the castle was supposed to be clear, as, theoretically, no one else could get this close to the dragon. Unfortunately, we ran into an unexpected problem. The king has a bastard child who inherited the royal family's genes, but he's too weak to go out into the field. He was staying here, which should not have been an issue, but the king had assigned him a royal protector for some reason. We ran into the kid, and a fight with the protector erupted. Fortunately, since we were not interested in the kid, we were able to escape. The protector didn't follow us either, since he had to stay with the child. But even so, escaping was not so easy. Lex nodded his head. Not only was he studying the dwarf using his instincts and sixth sense, he also used the fancy contact lens to completely analyze the dwarf's equipment. Despite his relatively low cultivation level, his gear was no joke. If he had been reduced to such a state in spite of all his preparations, that protector must have been quite powerful. Either that kid was very special to deserve such a powerful protector, or the level of the royal family's guards was very high. It seems to me like you guys have made a lot of preparations for your trip, Terrell. It's not so easy to resist the dragon's might, and there's something unusual going on that messes with the spirit, and causes one to be completely lost in thought. Do you mind explaining to me how you resisted both, and especially what the latter is? The dwarf grit his teeth. This was all valuable information, and revealing it might get them in trouble later. But if he died right now, there would be no later to worry about, so he had no voice but to divulge all that he knew. Resisting dragon's might is not all that hard. The dwarves and the elves have been enemies for many millennia, but they recently buried their bitter hatred to join hands together to face the domineering and deadly dragons. With dwarven engineering and elven enchantments, we have designed many treasures specifically designed to take on dragons. The chest plate that I'm wearing has an enchantment that will erase or reduce the effects of dragon's might, as long as I have enough spirit energy to feed it. As for the spirit pull, it's a common phenomenon that occurs with any treasure that a dragon obsesses over. The influence of a dragon's attention is far from simple, let alone the effects of its obsession. All dragons are natural-born treasure hunters, and any place they call home is bound to be full of treasure. But, although this planet has valuable ores, it is nowhere near valuable enough to attract a dragon. The spirit energy is poor, and it is far from a star, and so is cold. Considering the overall poor quality of the entire planet, there must be some exceptionally valuable treasure here that attracted the dragon, and now has been tinged with the dragon's obsession, affecting one and all,